Hello, I'm Layne Hartsell with the Korea Industry and Technology Times. I'm here today to talk about BRICS in a multipolar world with Malik Ayub Sumbal and Jan Krikke. Welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Layne. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Layne.
As many of you know, the BRICS Summit has been underway this week since, Thursday, and then ends up today with many world leaders meeting to discuss a kind of new integration and investment, trade, culture, and so forth. I have with me two experts on Asia. The first is Jan Krikke, who is the former Japan correspondent for various media and editor of Asia 2000 in Hong Kong. He's also the correspondent in Bangkok, Thailand for Asia Times. He's the author of a current book, Creating a Planetary Culture, which I highly recommend. Very interesting perspective. And also he's the author of When India Eclipses China, and another book on Leibniz and some of the German philosophy. Very nice. So welcome, Jan. I have my second guest here, Malik Ayub Sumbal from Pakistan. He's an award-winning journalist of the Syracuse Mirror Award 2012 for journalism, and he has more than 18 years of experience in journalism, moderation, TV anchor, editorial positions, and many others. Thank you. He's the author of The War in the South Caucasus, Tovuz to Karabakh. Today, I want to start with Malik Ayub Sumbal, whom I've known for a while, and we've had many conversations about a particular area of the world that I wasn't very educated on, particularly the Caucasus, Eurasia, and so forth. As you know, that everybody is concerned about Eurasia that's looking at the news. Malik, can I invite you to give your opening statements and proceed from there? Thanks.
Yes, sure, please.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Layne, for organizing this wonderful seminar or webinar or whatever you say. And I think that the topic you choose is really interesting, and you can say that it is the time to discuss such kind of topics in an informal way. You mentioned previously, we talked that the discussions and the seminars, I think they have a formal impact. But of course, when we discuss the things in an informal way, that could come up with some more brainstorming and the ideas and some very positive discussion. So the topic which you mentioned about the BRICS 2023, I think that I have been quite following about the multipolar world and the concept of the multipolar world that emerged quite recently, and especially we can say that the rise of the China or whatever be there. But why this concept emerged, multipolar? When we say about the world multipolar, so why was the need of this multipolar world? Because there is too much frustration around the world when we talk about the unipolarity of the world. So then we see that the third world countries and the regions who have the resources, who have a lot of wealth under the earth, and some very, you can say a word I use, that the very smart nations, they're gonna be take out these resources. But I give an example to the recent about Niger. So Niger too, and what overall the situation there, that when I read the facts, when I saw the data, that the Niger, the uranium products and their other imported like the metals and the other thing that they are produced. So I was really shocked that they are highly enriched in these resources, but the fate of these people who are in Niger, it's never been going to change. So I also mentioned, I think previously I did one of the vlog about the Italian Prime Minister, that she say about this the Burkina Faso, and that video quite went viral, and how that the miseries of the people in the Burkina Faso, they are suffering. So let's come to the topic about the BRICS. So the expansion of the BRICS was quite long, and I think that was quite demanding by the other member countries. because the voice that I listen from the BRICS is something that I never saw on the other platforms, like the top other, like G20 or other G7, G8 or whatever be there. So the ultimate urge of the countries that is coming from the G20 from the BRICS is something like the deep desire of these countries. Like now we see that the 6-member extension, and this extension means that it's also a polarity of the countries that are going to be joining this 6 new member bloc and 5 BRICS ones. So we see Saudi Arabia, Iran. So though you see that how the countries they have the rivalry previously, but now they are going towards a new beginning on a new journey in which I think that they are going to resolve the conflicts and the issues. So then we see that Ethiopia is one of the countries that is also something like you can say they have the potential in Lebanon. I'm not much deep going to be the figures and the facts about their economic position, but of course they are in a deep desire. Then the Saudi Arabia, Iran, United Arab Emirates, and the Argentina. Argentina has also some problems in their economy. We see a lot of mean that the analysis from different perspective about the Argentina economy, and now I think they are going to BRICS. So the first thing that is the most important one in the BRICS is watershed moment, I can say, is that the multi-currency exchange and the trade. So this multi-currency exchange concept, actually, it's something like the negation of the United States hegemonic policies, because because the dollarization is something that the US all foreign policy and the regime change, it's going to be something like on the dollarization. And how, I mean, especially the countries, the third world countries that are under the strong grip of the IMF and the World Bank, and simultaneously they have a very strong, like the lock on them is the dollarization. So this you can say the snare, the trap, or whatever be there, the word we can use, is this that the BRICS it's going to be take out from this strong hindrance or the stoppage of this dollarization. So that is something like this, because US plays all its foreign policy on this centralization of their dollarization policies. And now because now countries, like many countries, they are going to trade in some other currencies, and that could be definitely because United States think that it is something like this, that an attack on their authoritative US dollar hegemonic policies. But it is, of course, because US has been ruling the world with a unipolar world order. And the BRICS countries, if the US consider that this is something like the challenge to the US hegemonic unipolar world agenda. So, but now I think a lot of countries coming into this this debate and in this philosophy or school of thought that they should have to come forward, because the situation of their economies is getting quite horrible, and it's always not like this that the US policy should be fulfilled, because US dollar hegemonic policies and the unilateral or the unipolar agenda is totally oriented towards the Western policies of the United States. You see how they storm into the Middle East. I mean, one by one, there is a spring revolutions comes on, and the countries have been suffering a lot. Then we saw what happened in Afghanistan, Iraq, all this, because previously there was the US petro, that this nexus was quite strong. And it's very hard for the countries to understand and to come out from this crunch or whatever be that there. The second thing that is the BRICS highlighted, and it is also encouraging about the UNSC, because we see that the United Nations implementation of the resolution and other thing, it's been quite not coming on something like the implementation way. The US passed the resolution, but we saw a lot of violation of these United States resolution. So that thing is also one thing is very important one. The new development BRICS Bank, I think that is also something like because they are pouring a lot of money in this, and this thing is this because this when we say this, the Eastern World Order are the emergence and rise of the multipolar world. So this order itself, the beginning and the start of this order was this, that there are none of them of the hegemony in this thing. There could be something like the equal, like give and take, like mean that to share and to benefit all, especially the depressed and especially those communities that are at the verge of the collapse, or those countries or those societies that we see have been suffering from this something like the US strong policies. Other thing that we say is the BRICS agenda comes up with something like that is also important one, because we saw the food security and the food shortage recently, and they have a very strong voice that there should be an intact food supply and the food security. And finally, they also focus about the conflict like the Ukraine and the other conflicts, because Ukraine is one of the major conflict right now. And they mentioned that there should be some sort of the peace and dialogue process. It should be open. And I think that the BRICS has a say, and they could contribute toward the peaceful solution of this Ukraine-Russia conflicts that's going on. So overall, I think that in a positive perspective, I see BRICS is something that is booming with a multipolar world order, with an Eastern approach, and with some new possibilities and new engagements, especially those communities, those countries that was really needed now. And so that is, I think that is something, my discussion point. I conclude here. If you have anything we can discuss.
Thank you, Malik. I appreciate the extensive review that you gave there just in a very short time. I'm going to hold off on questions from myself. I'll take a more confrontational perspective later after we talk. I want to bring Jan Krikke from the Netherlands here from the Asia Times. He's a Bangkok correspondent, as I mentioned. Jan, let me give the floor to you for 8 or 10 minutes. I muted you there, so you got to unmute.
Oh, you're mute, John.
I muted you, John. Yeah, just unmute. Yep.
Still mute. I think there's some problem, John. 1 minute.
Can you hear me now?
There he goes.
Okay.
We got you.
All right. Thank you, Malik. Thank you, Layne, for organizing this session. Maybe it's a good idea to briefly look at the origin of BRICS, right? It has a kind of a curious birth. People who don't know this may be surprised to know that BRICS was originally identified by Wall Street bankers as an investment opportunity, right? Are you okay, Layne?
Introduction to Jan. All right. The next guest is Jan Krikke. As I mentioned before, he's the Asia Times correspondent here in Bangkok. Jan, let me give you 8 to 10 minutes for your statement.
Thank you, Layne. Thank you, Malik. Maybe it's a good idea to briefly look at the birth of BRICS. Many people may not be familiar with its origin. The acronym BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, China, was coined by investment bankers in Wall Street in the year 2001. These 4 countries were identified as promising long-term investment opportunities. That says something about how much has changed in the last 20 years, right? That's unlikely that a New York investment banker would today recommend Russia as a long-term investment opportunity, right? The report came out in 2001, and in about 6 years later on the sidelines of a UN conference in New York, the leaders of these four countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, they met on the sidelines of a planetary session at the United Nations, and they agreed to meet in the following year, in 2008, I think it was, or 2009, to consider how they could leverage their collective power as emerging economies to maybe influence global trade flows, global trade governance, and financial institutions, and so on. In 2009 was the first official BRIC meeting, only the four initial countries, and they made baby steps in making it sort of an organization to form a counterbalance to the Western-dominated global economic, political system, financial included. Their first main decision was to, like Malik mentioned, the BRICS Bank, that was funded by some $100 billion. $100 billion, I think, yeah. And that money has been allocated to several development projects in Africa, the Middle East, India, I think. So when they announced a little bit later, they announced plans that they might consider developing a alternative to the US dollar that was somewhat premature, but it did have an impact on the dollar, which dropped in value somewhat. For a long time, it remained rather quiet around BRICS. It was a bit like the non-aligned nations that they had in the 60s. There was a lot of talk, but there was really not much of an impact that they made. But that changed with the Ukraine war. That triggered a lot of concern all around the world that the United States could use the dollar to exclude a country like Russia from the global financial system, right? So that sort of gave a new impetus to BRICS. And that culminated in the great interest in the recent Johannesburg meeting of BRICS earlier this month. But it's also useful to look at BRICS in an even larger historical context. For much of recorded history, India and China were the largest economies in the world. Up until even during the colonial era, when England had the largest geographical coverage, if you will, in the world, it still didn't match the economies of China and India, right? Layne, maybe you can throw up that one slide we have of the size of the economy, the global economy in the year 1500. So that's over 500 years ago. That slide shows that China and India were far larger than the economies of either England, France, or Germany, by far. That lasted from recorded history as long as 2,000 years ago until the middle of the 18th century, when the United States became the world's largest economy. I think that was around 1860 or 1870. So, do you have that slide, Layne? That slide that shows the global economy in the year 1500, domestic gross national product in the year 1500. See, the China and India are towering above the European powers, right? Who had much larger military power, but were in fact much smaller in economic terms. So BRICS, the development of BRICS that we see today has many dimensions, right? It has economic factors, it has geopolitical factors, monetary factors, but in an historical context, we could say that the Western era, from say the mid, well, if you start with the colonial era, that would be like the 1600s until now. The West has dominated global economy, right? But in about mid-century, the global economy will sort of return back to where it was in the 19th century, with China and India again being the largest economies in the world, right? So BRICS is a mechanism to restore kind of an historical situation that existed up until the United States became the dominant global economy, right? So I think that's useful to know in the dynamics of what is happening in the world today, right?
Are you able to see the slides?
Yeah, I saw them, yes. Very good.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. So BRICS is part of a process that returns us to a kind of an historical norm, right? What has accelerated it, ironically, is the Ukraine war, because it made the developing, emerging economies realize how vulnerable they are to the global monetary system that revolves around the dollar. It's probably also useful to say a few things about how important it is to have a global reserve currency. That is we are accustomed to it, and we don't usually think about how much power it gives to the United States. For one thing, it allows the United States to set interest rates, right, for the global economy, because if the United States raises its interest rates, there will be a response in all the other major currencies, right? Because all the currencies are somehow related to the rate of the dollar. So that's one point. The second point is that the price of energy, especially oil and gas, is measured in dollars, right? So that was part of the United States strategy after it ended the gold standard in 1971. It persuaded Saudi Arabia to sell oil, to price and sell oil only in dollars. So anybody who wanted to buy oil from the Middle East had to have dollars, right? So that gave the United States an enormous leverage over the global financial system and the economic system, because every dollar that is spent outside of the United States is processed through New York. So New York is sort of like the gateway to the global monetary, financial, economic system, right? The reason why this is so important is that oil, energy, is only about 7% of the global economy, in terms of value, right? But it is needed for the other 97%, right? Without oil, nothing moves, right? No airplanes fly, no cars drive, no ships move. Everything needs oil, right? So if you have a chokehold on the oil supply, and you have a monopoly on the price, the way this is priced, that gives you enormous leverage, right? So the BRICS organization has a lot of noise, right, about Western economic dominance and so forth, and the advantages that the US has in terms of controlling the global monetary system, and the BRICS wanting to have more voice in global institutions. For instance, when they set up the BRICS Bank, they offered to make that part of the IMF on the condition that the IMF would be reformed, right? That it would be a more equitable governance. In some of these international institutions, Belgium has more voting rights than Brazil, right? So that kind of skewed system is what the BRICS wanted to reform or change, right? That it becomes a more equitable system that's not strictly dominated and controlled by Western institutions. But that is all important, but to maintain control of the dollar or to undermine the dominance of the dollar, that's really the ball game that we are playing. Everything else is secondary. And you can see that if you look at the history of reserve currencies, right? Layne, you have a slide on that, number 4, I think. That's a little slide that shows the history of reserve currencies since the Western expansion policy, starting with Portugal, right? So you see that the countries that were economically dominant in the colonial era, from Portugal to Spain to Holland, France, the UK, etc., their economic power translated into having a reserve currency that was needed to buy and trade in goods, right? What's notable is that all these reserve currencies, they last for about a century, give or take, right? So in the beginning of this, the 19th century, when the United States became the dominant power, it slowly replaced the British pound as the global reserve currency, right? So some people measure it from the First World War, that the dollar is dominant. Others would say after the Second World War, right, which is the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944. Depending on how you measure it, the US dollar is living on borrowed time or is getting close to it, right? So the big question is, how do we transition from the dollar to a new currency, right? So a lot of people in the run-up to the BRICS meeting in South Africa this month, there was a lot of speculation about, will BRICS introduce a rival to the dollar, right? A BRICS currency, if you will. I'm not sure if that was ever a plan or if this was just speculation and based on certain theories of bankers and so forth. But I think that was never really a realistic possibility because it is very complicated to replace the US dollar. It's also not very desirable to do that overnight because it would collapse the global economy. How we transit from a dollar-based monetary system to a new monetary system. That is really the big elephant in the room. We probably will see a transition to countries trading with their own currencies, but the big change will come when digital currencies become the norm. I think digital currencies, maybe with using blockchain kind of technologies, will allow the world to decentralize the monetary system. So when you have a digital wallet in your pocket, it doesn't really matter if you pay in dollars or in rupees or in German, European euros. Computers can convert currencies on the fly if necessary, right? So we will probably see central banks developing digital currencies that will be interchangeable with the digital currencies of other banks, and the value of these currencies will probably be determined by a new benchmark that may be based on gold or a combination of commodities. And that all can be done in real time. So when you have a completely digital monetary system, a digitized monetary system, you may not even need a reserve currency. You only need credit. And if your credit is good, then you don't need a reserve currency. But that's a speculation on my part, right? The graph that we just saw showed Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin will be part of that mix, but I think the place to look is the Chinese central bank digital currency, which I suspect will become a template for central banks all over the world. And the ironic thing is that the Basel Bank, the Bank of International Settlement, is working with central banks in China, in India, in Europe, and everywhere, including the Federal Reserve. They are working on a digital currency system that is interoperable, right? So we hear a lot of noise about war between BRICS and the United States and Europe. Behind the scenes, they are working on a digital currency interoperable system, right? All this will happen. This will happen sort of in a sort of an evolutionary way. They will try to avoid shocking the system that could cause the collapse of either the dollar or the British pound or the Japanese yen or any other over-leveraged bank. That is really the critical issue at the moment, right? BRICS is a sideshow, relatively speaking, to the critical phase in which the monetary system finds itself, the global monetary system. If it can be eased out of that crisis into a global digital currency system, I would expect that we would see a devaluation of all the current Western fiat currencies because they are all indebted in a way that is practically unmanageable. Mathematically, it's probably impossible for the West to solve its debt crisis. So they will probably have to contend with a lowering standard of living caused by a devaluation of their currencies vis-a-vis especially China and probably India and Russia. And one of the reasons why BRICS has been so quiet about the reserve currencies is that they are trying, that's my estimation, they are trying to engineer a soft landing for the dollar, right? And it's only how this dynamic plays out, how the United States is willing to accept a sort of shared role in the global monetary system. That's really the big issue that BRICS is bringing to a head, if you will, right? So I think BRICS is important, but the monetary system, that's where the real game is being played out. So what's the dollar and what's the development of central bank digital currencies, because that will decide our global financial system of the 21st century, a decentralized digital central bank currency that will do away with reserve currencies.
Jan, thank you for the analysis. And I wanted to mention for people that are listening that Jan and I have just completed a three video series that we put together into a publication that'll be out on Korea Industry and Technology Times, probably tomorrow, early next week, something like that. And it's on some of what Jan has gone into today. For both of you, Malik and Jan, I want to take this time now to give you a chance to have an exchange with each other. So I'd like to ask Malik to pose questions based on Jan's comments, and Jan, of course, back to Malik. Maybe just like a back and forth, 2 or 3 times, and then move on to the next topic. Okay.
Well, maybe if I can open it, I'd be very interested to hear Malik's view of how China views BRICS, but also sees it as an instrument to change the global power structure. Can we say that China is using BRICS to change the global system, or is that going too far?
I've got you on mute there, Malik.
Yeah. So yeah, China mean that their vision for the BRICS is something like a voice that that they claim to be that they are going to uplift the economies, and of course, mean that even President Xi mentioned in this opening in this BRICS summit that China has not the hegemonic agenda, mean that they have the win-win and the share agenda. That is, of course, the Belt and Road Initiative, because you can say that the BRICS and the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, they are something like the simultaneous kind of things that are moving on. But I think that they are not going to change the world geopolitics, or you can say that the world power structure. But you mentioned in your presentation, and I really like that point also, that the financial system should be changed. I think that is they want a financial system that you mentioned that this cryptocurrency and the monopoly, how the monopoly of the dollar will end, because dollar have a strong control on the financial system. Everything that goes from the US, New York is the hub of the dollarization, or whatever you say. So this control and the monopoly and the, you can say that the some sort of the cap of the dollar on everything, that is, of course, that could be changed only through this crypto model or something like this, digitalized currency, or whatever we can say. And when we see about this, the leading conglomerates around the world, the big tech, I think this all digitalization kind of the stuff, and we see that smartization and this climate agenda is moving on. So all these things actually setting a new world order, I think. And I think the US is also going to be parallel with this kind of the platform. I can say that we see a lot of propaganda from both sides that about the 5G is going to, the rays are the more dangerous and this kind of the stuff. So it's, I think that because the Chinese local, the model that they implement inside China on the financial system, or that is quite centralized or whatever be there. But I think that for an international system, I think they are quite open. Mean that they want to listen the other financial systems around the world and to launch something like the new because digital model or whatever be there. Of course, regarding when we say about the control of the world or who will gonna be have something like the political and the other international arena, the powers game. I think China is quite well in now. I think they are. I think being a leading economy now. I think that it is to underestimate China is not something like a rational approach. Mean that the US has to accept this, that the power corridor is not now one. It is like multipolar, the concept when they say that there is a polarity in the world. It's a multipolar. Now, it's not only that the US has to decide everything. This is something like this. The point is this, that it is not only now the US who will decide about the world. There are other powers who has the right, and there are other countries who has to know there is right, that who will decide. So the problem here actually I think start here. so my point, which I say that, but China has not, because we see the history of the China, I think they are not like the interventionist. The policy is not interventionist. They are not going to be occupy something. They are not going to be as the US model is, because the US model is this, that to go there and to bomb and to this and take the resources back home. Of course, every country mean that the multipolar are the leading powers. They have the financial interest, and of course, without financial interest, it's not to move on the policies. But there is like on the sharing model. It is not to make them partners and to uplift. I remember that the infrastructure building. I think I saw one of your slide. I think maybe you mentioned about the African countries, how the China has built up their infrastructure and this kind of stuff. So I think that model and that approach is very much acceptable for the countries, especially the countries who are in developing, underdeveloped countries, because when I say, or when I give about the Chinese example, that China gave this right and this opportunity, that if there is like one cell phone that is like $2,000, so China giving opportunity to the countries and to the people that they have an opportunity to use a phone in 100 $100. Mean that this is not something like this, that the concept of the deprivation among the societies, among the countries, because when there is an information and the technology boom, so at that time we say that China comes up and they give this opportunity to everybody, that yes, if a person who is sitting in the US or some other countries, developed countries, and he can use a dollar, he can use a mobile phone at the cost of the $2,000. So I think that if there is only one mobile at the cost of the $2,000, and there is no other there is no other parallel manufacturers who give this right or opportunity to the other people or other buyers who have less buying capacity, and they can afford a phone like in $100, $100. So of course this gap China has ended. And this gap we saw in the last 2 decades, it's fastly ended. Now, that China give opportunities to every person to have a choices in the model, have a opportunity to decide that if you cannot buy this 2,000, you have an opportunity to buy 101. So this thing, I think, that is moving fast, and that is widely accepted around the world.
Yes, I agree. And what people also have overlooked is that despite the fact that the West has overspent in the last couple of decades, right? They put too much money into circulation. And people have wondered why that didn't result in inflation. An important reason was cheap Chinese imports kept prices low, right?
Yeah,
some 80% of all products sold at Walmart and Amazon are made in China, right?
Yeah.
So That's part of the reason why inflation has remained low. But I think that journey has now finished. I think partly because of growing protectionism in the West, and China is forced also to raise its prices because its economy is getting richer, so people get more money, and that drives up prices. And so we probably see a movement towards Vietnam and maybe India, but maybe even Africa now, right? With the slide we just saw, that was the project China has been involved with in Africa, the roads, bridges, harbors, airports, schools, etc. Part of that was financed by the BRICS Bank, but a lot of that was also just purely investment by the Chinese government. There's another bank, the AIIB, I think it's called.
Yes.
Right?
Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank.
Right. But this is illustrative of the different approach that the Chinese have taken compared to the Europeans and the Americans.
Yes, indeed.
You mentioned earlier the Niger situation. The timing of that was kind of peculiar. The coup in Niger that happened just before the BRICS summit, right? And I'm not sure if it was timed as such, but it got additional attention. And you mentioned, I think, the Prime Minister of Italy, Meloni, I think her name is. Her video on that coup went viral, as you mentioned, and she gave an example that was quite striking for the situation the Europeans find themselves in. Meloni said something to the effect that Niger has been a French colony since Niger has gotten independence from France in 1962, right?
Yeah.
So that is 60 years ago, right? When you look at the trade relationship between France and Niger, France imports 30% of the uranium it needs to power its electricity network, right? So 30% of the French energy for the electricity comes from Nigerian uranium exports, right? In Nigeria itself, 90% of the population does not have access to electricity, right? So it's hard to give a more damning indictment of French policy than that simple statistic, right? What has France done in the last 60 years, except for importing natural resources from Niger, while it has been unable to provide Niger with electricity? How is that possible, right? Which speaks again to the problems with the IMF and the World Bank, right? Their investment has been focused largely on putting money into these countries that would facilitate the extraction of resources, right? Not the development of the infrastructure, but just enough to extract the resources, right? So I'm sure that the infrastructure that is needed to extract the uranium from Niger and move it to France, I'm pretty sure that was paid for by France, right? So the mining equipment, the roads, the transportation to the harbors, I'm sure that was a French investment. But it benefited some people in Nigeria.
Some people.
But it benefited mostly France, right?
France.
But that is so symbolic, that kind of an arrangement is so symbolic for the Western relationship with Africa. The previous president of Nigeria was not even Nigerian. He's from Arab extraction, right? But I'm pretty sure that he filled his pocket with French money to keep the status quo. And that's why he was kicked out by the rebel armies, right?
Yeah.
The ECOWAS, the ECOWAS, all the leaders of the ECOWAS are in bed, if you will, with European and American money, right? They are maintained by the Western economic system. So they have no choice but to follow the Western economic system. Why this is so delicate, just as BRICS happened, is that could ECOWAS send in a military force into Nigeria to economic interest, right? We can see their hesitation to do so, right? So this not only applies to Nigeria, but it applies to much of Africa, right? Which has only started to develop after the Chinese started pouring money into infrastructure. You cannot develop an economy without infrastructure, right? You need harbors, you need roads, you need bridges. China put them in. And that's as part of a Belt and Road initiative, right? And then Europe last year, I think, or a couple of months ago, Europe announced a $20 million or $20 billion fund to start a rival infrastructure program in Africa, right? A European Belt and Road kind of initiative, right? So, that shows you how far they are behind the ball, right? I mean, it required China to wake up Europe that they're losing Africa, right?
Yeah.
So
they're losing.
So BRICS is that's part of the BRICS psychology too, right? They understand who their friends are, and they understand who are their exploiters, if you will, right? So it's not there's no ideology behind BRICS, right? It is a psychology, not an ideology, right?
It is a psychology.
That's what the West doesn't understand, that it's a psychology, not an ideology. That's what they don't understand.
Excellent. Thanks for your comments. Let me move on now. I have some questions for each of you. I'm going to divide this a little bit differently. I'd like to go with asking Malik about more of the geopolitical aspects, since you're an expert in that, and then I'd like to ask Jan about the economics, and maybe we can get to India eclipsing China, which, there's a possibility there in the future, not now. I don't know if we'll have enough time for that last question. Malik, I want to start off with the war in Eurasia. I'm sure that people listening in would want to know about this from the BRICS perspective, so I think we really need to cover this today. Russia's position is one, I'm speaking of the leadership, not of the people. It's one of seeing the Soviets as weak, and they want a czarist type system. In my perspective, they probably would want to expand as much as they could. If you look at the philosophy behind it, although they can, they'd never be able to get beyond where they're at right now. Their nuclear stance in the past was strategic. With the Soviets, it turned into that even if Russia were to fall, that they could use nuclear weapons, and now it's pretty much a weekly belligerent kind of threat. If you're going to have conflict with another country, why should it involve everybody else? Because as you know, nuclear conflict could expand and hit into, thermonuclear war. So that's the first question. The other is, in the case of BRICS, can BRICS provide some kind of buffer and, move towards some type of solution? The geopolitics, I had written in an article around the time that the war started that these geopolitical plates are moving, the economics and so forth there, and it just so happens that Ukraine is right in the middle. But this is nothing new. Ukraine is the direction that Europe has gone through a number of times to invade Russia, the Nazis and so forth, going back, the French. So can you provide some perspective on China, India, South America, and Brazil being able to provide some counter rate? Say, for example, Brazil might be able to help out.
Thanks, Layne. Yeah, your first question part about the Russian. We have been listening now on a weekly basis about this nuclear threat. So I would go a little back into the perspective of this Ukraine. That mean that how this all episode started. Mean that it's all started about the provocation. Mean that the West and the US has been provoked this Russia to at that level that ultimately this provocation has been come out. And now when we say that we are the other Poland is under threat, we see that there is another country like the Finland is under threat, and this kind of the news we have been listening on regular basis. So, and now we see that the drone strikes has been moving towards the Moscow, and this is the same thing which Russian has been concerned about this, that we have a few miles that why Americans and the NATO is going to be inside this Ukraine, and why they want to take this Ukraine as a member, and this because initially it was starting like this. So it's mean that the West is pushing Russia to a very provocational and endangered kind of the zone. Mean that when ultimately Russia feared so far. In fact, when you push them at that level where they have to react, and ultimately the last option mean that the nuclear war, that I don't think so. Mean it's out of question. Mean that it could be a suicide, and nobody want to the suicide like this. That if any country use the nuclear bomb, mean that the repercussions and the consequences not only that. Mean it's the first thing a suicidal attempt. So nobody could do at that level unless mean that the last option. And this is, I think that your first question was much connected with the second part, that this is actually this risk, this danger is this, that the countries like this Eurasian wise or the BRICS wise, that is coming that ultimately you come up on the solution that the ceasefire or whatever be there, it should end. And this voice we don't see on the European side, on the American side. They are still provoking and pushing them, mean that the billions of dollars they are pushing like this. Okay, give it to Zelensky, give it to this F-16, they are training there. So mind, what is this for? Mean this is something like that you have been put the whole world previously into this Middle East, and then this war on terror, and this after 9/11 mean that you have destroyed the whole part of the world. And now the remaining thing that is going to be accomplished through this Russia-Ukraine war. And every time mean that the Ukraine comes up on the peace table, mean that it is something like those powers who don't want to comes him on power and to make a peaceful solution. Of course, mean that the BRICS countries have potential. They could do some sort of the peaceful negotiation, but of course this is not acceptable to the US model, because US is not in this position, or they don't want to be on the compromising position. They want to let in Ukraine to come on this thing, because the Europeans mean that they are getting, sorry to say about this word, but they say that there is a huge influx of the migrants, and they are only accepting that the Ukrainians could be accepted and not other migrants. This discrimination, it's also beyond imagination, beyond understanding. And when we see that Every time when because you know that the US has put a lot on stake now. US West has put a lot on stake, and they don't want that without their consent. If Ukraine will come on the dialogue table, I think that could be the death of the Western, mean that they think that this is their defeat, and they don't want to accept this thing, whatever, and putting everything on stake. And this is a very dangerous trend. It's quite dangerous because when you put everything on stake and you don't think that, okay, this is mean that you burn all your boats and do you say that I have wanted to move ahead. I think that could be because the still world has not divided into the blocks. Mean that but we are heading towards that direction, and I think that there should be some positive and serious voice, and that could be a peaceful negotiation. And I think that the BRICS has point on this Johannesburg Declaration. They has mentioned one point that there should be a peace and dialogue, and the existing conflicts should end up.
Yeah, for those listening in, I'm speaking with Malik Ayub Sumbal, who's a journalist, and also I wanted to mention that he's the head of the Caucasus Center for Strategic Studies. So this is why I asked him such a difficult question, because that's the most difficult area at this point, other than say Pakistan and India border, which we could get to maybe in another section. Okay, Jan, for China and economy, if I take a look at the FT, or I look back over some of the covers of The Economist, there's a consistent, they have like the little cartoon and, the dragon and so forth, consistent message that China's going down, so forth and so on. Of course, the evergreen, or what is it, Everland or is it Evergreen? That
Evergreen.
Particular Evergreen. The particular crisis is certainly causing a lot of trouble. I think the analysts, like the real analysts, not me, but they're looking at this cautiously and concerned. What is your view on this? It's almost kind of xenophobia. It's a form of hatred towards China. It comes in this way. It's an economic form. So you have the major economic publications trying to influence the market, which you're not supposed to do. But anyway, against the Chinese, look, China has a lot of problems, environmental, political, all of that. But I'm just talking about this specific case of the media, the issues with the economy and so forth. Can you address this question?
Well, we've been here before. If you go back to the 1970s and the 1980s, Japan was the major economic threat to the United States, right? There was a hype about, I don't know if you remember that, Walter Mondale, when he ran for president, that must have been 1976, I guess. That was at the height of the Japan paranoia. There was a time when the real estate of Tokyo was worth more than the real estate of the entire United States. And they were genuinely concerned that Japan would take over the leadership of economic power from the United States. And they came remarkably close if you look at the figures. At the height of the Japan boom, the Japanese economy was at about $5 trillion, and the U.S. economy was about $9 trillion. So that was close for a country with half the population of the United States. There was an enormous what you call it. It seemed like an organized campaign to stoke fear and dislike of the Japanese. And that went so far as that Walter Mondale running, I guess, against who was it? I forgot, but in a campaign appearance, Walter Mondale said he would make sure that American youngsters would not end up cleaning the floor around Japanese computers. That's how far the hype went. You know, they even expected a Japanese takeover of the American computer industry. Little did he know that the opposite happened, right? That the digital revolution, right, that America rose from the ashes, if you will, and Japan lost its way. It totally missed the internet boom, right? In under President Reagan, the anti-Japanese sentiment was raised to the point that you could see in Detroit car workers from the Detroit car industry. They demolished Japanese cars with a sledgehammer. I don't know if you remember that, but that was a famous.
I remember seeing. I was a child. I remember seeing this on the TV.
Yeah, and it forced Reagan to negotiate with the Japanese, asking for voluntary export restrictions. So the Japanese were forced to reduce their export of cars to the United States to give the big three, Chrysler, Ford, and GM, time to catch up. And that was mostly the just-in-time production process, right? That greatly reduced the cost of assembly line construction. The Japanese reduced their export of cars to a certain percentage of the total car market. I forgot the exact percentage. Next came the Plaza Accord. I don't know if you remember the Plaza Accord, but it was a meeting in the Plaza Hotel in New York that forced the Japanese and especially the Germans to revalue their currencies so that their products would become more expensive in the United States and American exports would become cheaper in Europe and in Japan. That was in 1989, I think, or 87. And that led to the so-called lost decade in Japan. The lost decade refers to an period of non-growth, of deflation, and that started in the early 90s, but it continued until well into the 2010s, and it is arguably still continuing in the sense that Japan never again reached the economic growth that it had enjoyed prior to the Plaza Accords. We see a similar pattern now with China, right? China is demonized. They are subjected to export restrictions. Certain technologies are banned from being exported to China. The difference being this time that the United States lacks the leverage to impose a Plaza Accord on China. It just doesn't have the muscle anymore to do that, right? If they could, they would. And one could argue they should. If I were making American policy decisions, I would have done that years ago. But that gets to the heart of the problem in the United States governance, its policy is decided by the industrial conglomerates that benefit from the status quo. So these companies are loyal to only their shareholders, not to their country, right? So when they can increase the yield on their shares by moving production to China, they will not care about the people in Pittsburgh that lose their livelihood, right? That has had both pluses and minuses, right? Globalization benefited China tremendously, right? I would argue that China has been the biggest beneficiary of globalization. America is now belatedly realizing that it lost that battle, right? It surrendered its industrial leadership to China. And it was partly based on a kind of Western mindset that was articulated by Bill Clinton. Clinton allowed China into the World Trade Organization, right? And the idea was, when we bring up the standards of living in China, we help them industrialize, develop from a developing to a developed country. The country will become a liberal democracy, right? That was the idea, right? That economic development would spur liberal policies and liberal governance. That obviously didn't happen, and they are now sort of turning back the clock by imposing all these sanctions that are, most of them are not even allowed under WTO regulations. But the genie is out of the bottle. You know, you cannot deindustrialize China. China is the largest trading partner of, I would say, every country in the world, just about, right? Except for the United States and a few others. But the reversal of that policy is what's hurting the United States. And there's an interesting parallel with Japan. Japan was very successful in its car industry, right? The model worked perfectly. They had the biggest car industry in the world. They produced over 10 million cars a year. If you look in Asia, you only see Japanese cars, right? But then China came with its electric cars, right? And the Japanese have, for the past 10 years, tried to resist the EV revolution because they don't have the advantages they have in the internal combustion market, right? They have a huge lead because they have perfected that model, Toyota and Honda especially, right? They resist change because they don't have the same advantage they have in the EV market, right? The EV market is more like making cell phones rather than making machines, right? That's not where the expertise of the Japanese is. But additionally, the raw materials that EVs need for production are rare earth metals that are sourced from China. So the Japanese resent being reliant on the Chinese, right? So Toyota has been pushing that hydrogen engine, right? Hoping that it could sort of leapfrog the EV revolution. That's obviously not going to work. But so the Japanese attempt to hold on to their past successes is a bit like the United States holding on to the dollar, you know? That is their base of strength, right? And giving it up is like giving up their main source of power. But they don't seem to realize that the more they fight to keep it, the more damage they do. And Ukraine, you can look at Ukraine in many different perspectives, right? But what is the problem in Ukraine? It's the Eurasian integration, right? If you have an economic combination of Germany, that's the key of the EU, and Russia, and China, and India, who needs a dollar? Who needs America? Right? America becomes an outer island to the Eurasian economy, right? So breaking the German-Russian economic ties was number one priority, right? Number two priority was causing instability in Ukraine, provoking Russia to intervene, hoping that somebody would topple Putin and get another Yeltsin in there that would be open to American capital and American liberal policies, right? The icing on the cake would be the disintegration of the Russian Federation, which is like 30 states or something like that. Can you imagine if Russian Federation fell apart? Can you imagine how many wars we would see of old tribes settling scores and contesting borders? It would be a windfall for the American arms industry, an absolute windfall for the global arms industry. Everybody would be sending weapons to the ex-Russian Federation, right? So this has been predicted almost to the decade, 100 years ago, by the English historian McKinley, I think, McKinsey, in his Heartland theory. He said, whoever controls the Eurasian heartland controls the world, right? So this was addressed to the British government. The British government controlled the oceans, right? It was the premier maritime power. It had no rivals, right? The only rival that could emerge was a central Eurasian power that would control the Eurasian continent, right? That was part of the Brzezinski doctrine. He who controls Ukraine controls the Eurasian continent, right? Look it up, the Brzezinski doctrine. Victoria Nuland, who is a protege of Brzezinski, is in charge of Ukraine policy.
She's also running for president, right? No, that's Haley. Okay.
She's just under the Secretary of State. I think she's the Assistant Secretary of State. So Nord Stream was historic in that sense, right? It was the first time that an infrastructural project was attacked, destroyed for geopolitical reasons. That has not happened in the modern era, right? So I think that will come to bite the Americans once this conflict is over, right?
Let me ask you to finish the thought, and then I want to move over to Malik.
No, that's you take it from here. But anyway, that's what I meant to say, that the Ukraine crisis gave BRICS an impetus, right? Suddenly it became clear how far the United States would go to maintain its global power, right? That triggered BRICS into action, right? So Ukraine will be remembered as the end of the American century, I think.
Okay, we have about 10 more minutes, so let me get some closing comments to wrap this up. Malik, there are a number of, after listening to you talk, to both of you, there's so many different directions I feel like I could go. I've got a number of directions, but One is there are, what is it? Is it 6 or 8 new countries that have been invited? If you'd like to give a response to Jan, or if you want to respond to this question, really up to you to finish up. So Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, Iran are invited to join BRICS. I see that the Saudi Arabia says that they want to be Europe 2.0, a new global renaissance. I think it's ridiculous, but anyway, can you talk about this, or anything else that we need to know today to finish up?
Yeah, actually there must be some very strong consensus between the member countries of the BRICS to include these 6 members, because I think there was a lot of applicants and they accepted the 6th one. So the message thought be that there is I think that there is a very much variety among the countries. You see that there are geopolitical variety, there is the economic situation, there is some other perspective of these members. That you see Argentina is at the verge of, you can say that when we see the Western newspapers and the Western media, so Argentina is at the verge of the economic collapse and the bankruptcy. So that is a quite polarity, that if that the country like the Argentina is going to BRICS, it means they will have some outcome or some boom to their economy. Saudi Arabia is coming towards the new model of the MBS, because MBS is going to launch its own so-called openness and something like this, very much modernization of his model, because the Saudi-Iran deal, that is also one of the most, I think that it's something like attaining the impossible, because they are the former rivals, and the Middle East, all the Middle East policies, especially, that is something like this, that the hit on the divide and rule US policy, because this is something like this, that the United States have been like Iraq war, Iran-Iraq war, other Shia Sunni sectarianism, and all this. Israel is a big player there, that the US implements and mostly listen its policy from the Israel when they're going to implement its Middle Eastern policy. So all these members variety and the polarization is actually something like this, that it's going to be some positive aspects and a push further. I say that this is a watershed moment for the BRICS. That it's going to be something like a new strength, a new boom, and they will definitely catch the world attention and in the limelight. Yeah. So the second part of your question, you mentioned.
No, I think that's a really good summary of the other countries that are joining in. I want to move over to Jan for your final comments. Feel free to respond to anything that we've already talked about, or I had another question for you related to this basket of currencies with gold and the renminbi, the ruble, and so forth. Feel free to tie it up however you like.
Well, I was actually interested in Malik's opinion about why Pakistan is not part of this arrangement with BRICS. Any idea?
I think that could be something like the geopolitical situation of Pakistan. I think that is something like this, that because Pakistan they could take Pakistan anytime when they want. But I think that could be some geopolitical perspective. That's why Pakistan has been put in the members list yet. And because this South Americans, I think that is the policy of the member state, and the other one, that was some more important, I think, as compared to, because in South Asia we see that India is already a member of the BRIC, and I think that Pakistan maybe in the second or third phase, maybe they will put Pakistan, yeah. But right now I think Pakistan is quite that we saw a geopolitical shift, and then we saw the political inside the political disruption is too much. So I think that they are quite busy in dealing that part.
I see. So, could it be also a veto from India?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think so, because Pakistan is member of the SCO. I think India is also the member of the SCO.
That's right.
So yeah. I don't think so that there could be some very strong opposition by the India on this, and it could possible also, maybe, but I personally don't think so that there could be any opposition.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll end up there. I want to thank you two for joining me. I have other notes here that we could go on and on with. Maybe I can invite you back for another discussion, such as I'm really interested in this idea of India eclipsing China, which Jan Krikke has had a lot to say about. And it looks like there's quite a lot going on, right? So India has now surpassed China, what was it, in April, with numbers of people. Their population is probably 20 years younger. Is a generation younger than China? At least, okay. And also something like Niger, Ethiopia, MENA. There's so many ways that we could go with all of this. So I appreciate you, and thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having us.